Welcome to the WanderLearn show. I'm your host, Tapon. In this episode, I interviewed Dr. Jonny Hanson, who has written a fantastic book about living with lynx. And he also talks about living with bears and rewilding the place with wolves. And at first I thought, this is going to be another very biased book that just talks about why it's important to rewild the place and why we should bring all these species back and not consider the other side of the story of why it's not maybe a great idea or why some people are not going to be that in favor of it. But I was so wrong. It's a fantastic book. That's a great documentary because it's so balanced. It captures all the different sides of the story. Fascinating discussion that we have about them. So you should definitely check out the book and enjoy this podcast with Dr. Hanson. And also become a patron at patreon.com/ftapon to pick up some cool rewards. It's Tapon encouraging you to wander and learn. Welcome to the WanderLearn show. I'm your host, Tapon. I'm here with Dr. Jonny Hanson, who has written a fantastic book about the lynx, wolves, and bears that they're considering at least, to reintroduce into Ireland and perhaps the UK and other parts of Europe and in the world. I mean, it's a global book. You have traveled to, I think, how many countries?
Been a lot of traveling, a lot of interviews, a lot of air miles, a lot of miles on the road, including in North America, Europe, and then, as you say, stories from Africa and Asia. So it's a global view of this issue. But yes, we're looking at could and should we learn to live with lynx, wolves, and bears again in my native Britain and Ireland.
And you're in Northern Ireland?
That's right. So I'm British and Irish. I have an identity and a passport from both parts of those two nations, the UK and Ireland. I suppose as it comes to rewilding, I use the terms Britain and Ireland because although Northern Ireland is technically part of the UK, Ireland is a geographical unit and Britain is a geographical unit. So I tend to think about reintroductions to the island of Britain and reintroductions to the island of Ireland because these species cannot return. They cannot swim the English Channel or the Irish Sea. They can only be brought back by us. And that makes it a fundamentally human process, Francis. And that's where a lot of the challenges come, not so much in sharing landscapes with apex predators, but sharing landscapes with each other and our different perspectives on apex predators. That is the nub of the book, and it's at the nub of the challenge and the opportunities of coexistence.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic book. I recommend everybody reading it, especially if you want to hear some nuanced discussion about this whole issue. Nowadays, it's so hard to find a book that has nuance and who tries to see things from both sides of the issues. And you have nailed it on this particular book, and that's what I appreciate. Other books are so polarizing. It's either we're going to go all the way and rewild everything, and then no way, we can't do this. And you listen to both sides of the argument, to carefully consider both sides of the argument, and let the reader decide. And you've done a fantastic job at doing that. I really appreciated that about your book.
Well, thanks, Francis. I completely agree. And for me, setting out to write that book, it was really important to allow people not to pick a side because there's so many things in life, maybe most things in life, where it's not really a black and white, us and them dichotomy. It's so much more nuanced, and there's a spectrum of opinions in between. That spectrum of opinions also makes compromise easier because it's easier to compromise with someone who's just slightly down the road on that spectrum of opinions than someone who's your polar opposite and therefore your quote unquote enemy. And on this and on every other issue, compromise it's part of life. It's part of politics. It's part of being human and making a life for ourselves on planet Earth. And that's the same with coexisting with carnivores. It involves compromise. And in this day and age, it's important to find and hold on to middle ground.
Yes, it's so true. Now, why did you write this book?
I wrote this book because being somewhere in between the let's rewild everything and let's rewild nothing, have a certain conflicted identity in the same way that I am both British and Irish. And there's a little bit of conflict in there. And I'm now at this stage in life comfortable and revel in that. Conflict's maybe the wrong word, just the diversity of identities and the tension sometimes between them, in the same way with whether or not we should have these species back in Britain and Ireland. There's a part of me that thinks this is a fantastic idea. I've dedicated a large part of my life to studying and working on the conservation of species like these. I love the idea in principle. At the same time, there is the part of me from a farming background that has run a small farm that understands rural communities are going through a lot of changes. Agriculture is changing. There's a lot of precariousness in farming communities. There's a lot of uncertainty about the future. And to many of them, there are concerns about how this will be managed and funded over long periods of time, not over the 5 years of a project or the 10 years of the policy. And I feel that tension and that tug that let's do it, let's not do it. And so I wrote the book to unpack and unpick what I thought, what others thought, what it looks like in other places, and then try and apply it back home.
You've done a very good job at that. I really appreciate that. And I think sometimes I call them limousine liberals who, just watch a National Geographic documentary about lynx or wild bears or wolves. And of course, they're sitting, sipping their cappuccino on their 30th floor, and they're saying, yes, absolutely, we need to do that. And the same thing, I've traveled about 8 years in Africa, and a lot of people naturally want to save African wildlife. And these are all noble things, and we understand them, but they don't understand that many Africans who are trying to grow some crops are kind of irritated when an elephant troop comes bursting through their farmland and just devours their entire livelihood in just a matter of a few hours. And that can be devastating to a common African. And it's important for people to understand, especially those of us who live in urban areas, that we like the idea of a lynx and living there and supporting their expansion. And there's only about 8,000 or 9,000, I believe, in Europe, if I remember correctly. But to have many more of them. But it's not so easy, is it?
No, and what you say there cuts to the heart of this, in that often there is a bit of a tension between the rural and the urban, between limousine liberals or armchair conservationists who live very far from the land and whose livelihoods are divorced from the vagaries of the land, and yet passionately, and that passion is a good thing, passionately endorse the conservation of these species. And it's making that connection between those who want it are not necessarily those who want to live alongside it. And we see that in Africa. I've seen it in Nepal. You see it in, for example, the reintroduction of wolves to Colorado in the last couple of years, and in Europe at the moment, and certainly in Britain and Ireland in the future. It is something, it's not always a binary. Again, that dichotomy of urbanites are completely for and rural dwellers are completely opposed, but it's certainly something that needs to be considered. And the documentaries we watch in particular shape our understandings of this issue. There was a report out the end of 2023 that surveyed 10,000 rural Europeans in 10 countries on their attitudes to large carnivores in their return. And by a very large margin, the single biggest source of information for them on large carnivores was documentaries. So if our documentaries then tell simplistic stories, especially of large carnivores being quote unquote pristine wilderness, far away from people, when those large carnivores turn up in unpristine places like the Dutch countryside, which is one of the most intensively farmed and densely populated countries in the world, or they turn out on the edge of Fort Collins in Colorado, or potentially in the future in some Irish towns or cities, or landscapes that we don't consider pristine wilderness, then those stories haven't prepared us for the realities, the messy realities of coexisting with these species and our activities, and finding them in your garden, or finding your pet or your sheep in an unfortunate situation with some of these animals. So we need stories that actually unpick the nuance of living alongside these animals, which we have done for 300,000 plus years. We evolved with them on the plains of Africa. And this story, potentially in Britain and Ireland, is just the latest chapter in a tale that is as old as time.
Right. When you did your doctorate degree, what was it in?
In human geography. So that relationship between people and nature. I wasn't just studying people, I wasn't just studying nature, but studying that relationship between us and the rest of nature. And that's something we hold as individuals, but crucially then we also hold it in groups, and groups tend to reinforce, because we evolved in tribes. We're suspicious of other tribes sometimes, and it reinforces what we believe. So again, like we said earlier, when we talk about coexisting with carnivores, we're also talking about coexisting with each other, the conservative, the liberal, the Democrat, the Republican, the Tory, the Labour, all of these tribes that we make sense of the world with, for good or for bad.
And that ends this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we've talked about, go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is always my social media username. My website is ftapon.com. Do you want to leave me an anonymous voicemail where you can make a comment or ask a question? Then go to speakpipe.com/ftapon. Furthermore, if you'd like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. Now, 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.